So you guys.
I actually have a question. So you guys have mentioned communication skills and taking ownership for developments and highlighting collaborations, and that's kind of what industry is looking for. How do you suggest tailoring your resume? How do you make your resume stand out if you do have those experiences and you really want to highlight those things? What's the best way to portray that to hiring managers?
Let me take a stab. So first of all, if you have been in a group like Morale and have led such a group, that will stand out on your resume. So the fact that you have looked to this notion that there wasn't something given to you, but you looked for opportunities is an indication from my perspective. When I see that, I translate that into leadership. I translate it into capacity as well. Initiative. You think you're really, really busy right now. I'm sorry, but you're not. And that's, I did not mean that disrespectfully. I'm just telling you, you will get to a point both in your personal and professional lives, if you're successful, where not hours of the day or anything like that, but the sense of urgency will be greater. So that's one thing. And by the way, don't put it on your resume if you don't want to be asked about it. So if you have that you played volleyball on your resume, that's fine. I've actually had people that had volleyball, and I asked them about it, and there was a story to be told about, we were the worst team in the league, and we did this, and this, and it was a key part of shaping my leadership. So that would be one thing. The second thing is this notion of impact. So even in the resume, for me as a non-specialist in whatever it is that you do, to understand the context of why you did it and what you learned, not the title of your thesis necessarily, but what you learned is important to me. Productivity is important. So we do look at, we recently had a candidate who we made a job offer to, and in the end she declined, went to academia. As a matter of fact, she had a publication record back to her second year as an undergraduate, and were all of them, compelling science? Probably not, but the sense of productivity was pretty impressive. So context, some indication of leadership, of engagement beyond what has been required of you, and then if you are going to include personal context that has meaning and is going to, in some way, shape, or form, mean something to me. Volleyball doesn't, but the fact that X, Y, or Z happened in the process of winning a volleyball championship or whatever is important. To know that you like cats and read. Maybe a potential partner needs to know that. A hirer does not. So those are sort of my thoughts. And well written, by the way. Run it past multiple sources. And speaking of mentoring, if you know somebody in the English department, if you know somebody who's in an industrial position, have them look at your resume, because it's still shocking to me that the standard deviation of quality of resumes is alarming.
Like, for instance, not indicating who your major professor was.
That was a local, a recent at a University of Minnesota PhD whose professor now knows that he or she was not identified, which I think they took personal affront to. So.
The following occurred to me. You need to be listing references so they can contact them. You'll put a email address. And by the way, you don't list anybody you have not asked permission of to list. Okay, but you could say a word or two about why that person's on your list. How, in what way do they know you? For instance, she has heard me present at an ACS meeting. That addresses directly an issue, one of the issues I can communicate, and this person can tell you something about that. So you can get it on the resume that way.
So I had a question associated with the job search. So when you're finishing up your graduate program, and for industry, it seems at times you're at the mercy of the economy or how a company may be performing. And so I was wondering if you had any suggestions on how to get a position in a company that may not be hiring or maybe on a hiring freeze or may not be posting positions that are directly applicable to your skills, if it's still possible to work your way into that company.
It's a good question. There's not a single answer. So my company, I don't want to tell you the history, but I'll give you a little context because it's important to answer your question. In 2011, we bought another company the same size as us, so we doubled in size. In 2013, we bought a third company that was roughly the same size. So we've gone from small to large, but really quickly, 3 separate companies still. If you're applying to me, we are always hiring. You just have to be good enough. We recruit at ACS meetings. We recruit at Minnesota, we recruit at Madison, we recruit Illinois, and we recruit Northwestern, and usually we swing by Chicago when we're at Northwestern, but with less passion because our recruiter is a Northwestern alumni. We try and make an offer at each campus once every couple of years. We don't necessarily, because quite frankly, nobody comes in that makes us say we have to have this person. My boss has a standing policy. If there's somebody we have to have, we will hire them. I don't care. Hiring freeze. He might come back to me and say, go figure out who to fire after he's agreed to let me hire. But if you are good enough.
I've warned you about that honesty.
Yeah, fire is the wrong word. There's probably a better word to use. Reallocate. But the reason for giving you a little history is our sister company, Nalco in Chicago, I mentioned latex polymer, so they do a fair amount of polymer synthesis. If you come in with some sort of background in inorganic chemistry, you can be the greatest chemist ever. You probably wouldn't have gotten an interview there unless you were forced by our HR group to interview you, but they wouldn't hire you to do synthetic polymer work. So it varies from company to company. Most large, good companies will always hire a candidate that they believe is too good to pass up. And most large companies have an active recruiting program. Different how they recruit. Some have given up on campus recruiting, have decided that that's the less productive use of, for example, travel money, and have gone more to ACS type recruiting, and or especially if you're looking for a mass spectrometer operator, that you would go to the Mass Spec Society meeting or something like that. But I know I have a lot of colleagues that are in hiring positions in other companies, and very few have what's a real hiring freeze if talent walks through the door. Now, again, in any given year of 50 or 60 on-campus interviews across the 2 campuses, that might be one person that we draw that conclusion on. But it's always possible. And don't ever go into an interview with the notion that they're not hiring or my skills aren't right. Your job is to prove to me I can't live without you. So that shouldn't be my decision. That should be your decision as to whether or not they're hiring or not hiring. That's got to be your mindset.
My experience, having worked with a lot of students over the years, is that's exactly right. The really significant companies are always hiring. They may call it a hiring of opportunity. They may have a special program that even when they're shut down and they're not hiring, if the right person comes along, if their talents are high and mesh with the company, they'll hire them. So I think that's absolutely right. But Marty didn't say something that I think is really important, and that's how do you get those networking? It's really, I don't know how many times someone has told it to me and I've told it to them, it's who you know. So if you know somebody at that company, that can be the foot in the door. So, get out there go to the local ACS meetings. There's a meeting every month. There's a regular ACS meeting. There's a young, I haven't belonged to it, the young chemist group that meets every week, or not every week, but about once a month. There's lots of opportunities to get out and meet people who are in industry. Do it. When there's one of these, let's be warm and fuzzy with 3M things on campus. And there's at least one of those every year. See if you can get your major professor to let you give a poster at it. You just got to get out there and meet people. And then when you're, looking at your career plans and you decide you want to stay in the Twin Cities, you've met them. And meeting other people, you just, got to get out to the national types of meetings, or the regional ACS meetings.
I mentioned iPrime before. I think there's a spring meeting coming up where they give a variety of papers which might have absolutely nothing to do with your research, but there will be a lot of people from industry there. And if I show up and somebody chats me up, to Pete's point before about picking your brains, it's part of my job. If you were to come up and introduce yourself to me and start your sales pitch, it's part of my job to listen. Because maybe you're that person that is too good to pass up. And even if your interest is completely, maybe you are someone who can synthesize latex polymers, and I'm not going to hire you in my job, but I'm going to pass your information along to the guy who does hire if I've been suitably impressed. So a good example of where, again, your research iPrime might not fall in your lap, and I'm not here to do an advertisement for iPrime. There's plenty of other industrial partnerships on the campus. But that doesn't mean there's not, sort of a captive audience there that might be good networking. And it's not an efficient process, by the way. It's not efficient at your stage. It's not efficient at my stage. For every connection I make, the value I get out of any of those is, other than a human interaction, is 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 500, where I end up hiring or using that relationship, using is the wrong word, but leveraging the relationship for something in my work or whatever. So don't think of it as, boy, I just spent an entire day at iPrime and I didn't get a job offer. If you got a couple of business cards and opportunity for a follow-up conversation, that's time well spent.
So my question was, for the part where we talked about mentorship, I wanted you to maybe explain a little more. Examples that you gave were more scientific. I was wondering if you get a mentor for soft skills or things that you might have to improve. And I wanted to know a little more about that other side of mentorship. If you can comment on that, it would be appreciated.
Well, I don't want to tell my life story. But at a point
Could you say it louder, because she had a soft voice and the room is big. Could you repeat her question?
Yes, I will. The question was about mentorship, how one could think about mentorship for soft skills, not just for technical. 10, 12 years ago, at a particular point in my career, I was sent off for leadership evaluation. It was a 3-day sort of thing in downtown Minneapolis, a group called Leader Source. Literally, I kind of laid on the couch sort of thing. So it was 3 psychiatrists and came up with a profile and told me what I already knew about myself. One of the things I know about myself is I like to be right. But it gave me some context about mommy and daddy and all that stuff. That's what I will not share that. I had a boss at the time who could engage anyone and everyone in a good, positive. He could disagree with you so beautifully that you ended up thinking at the end, well, he was still dead wrong, but somehow you felt good about that, which was sort of something that was a development need for me, still is actually a development need. And so I reached out to him, not when he was my boss, because that kind of complicates mentoring relationships, which is another reason to think about a mentor other than your advisor. And I told him the story. I actually shared with him the leadership development plan that I had gotten from LeaderSource and said, can we get together occasionally and you can kind of just share with me your philosophies, your strategies. Turns out he had some very specific strategies for how he went about managing his emotions and sort of making someone feel as if, not just that he was listening, but really proactively conveying that, and some very effective strategies that other than just being a nicer person than I was, there were strategies that I could actually use. So what I would take away from that is don't go to a hard-driving, aggressive, assertive person if what you're looking for is a way to present yourself in a little bit more accommodating or positive manner because you're a hard driver yourself. Look for someone who models the behaviors that you're looking to develop, and then ask them. And by the way, I said sort of flippantly that this 3-day event told me what I already knew about myself. If you haven't done it, a sort of self-assessment, a development plan, where you record what are my strengths and what are my development areas. I had done that a couple of times because I was forced to by some work program. And since this event, which was roughly 2005, I now do it annually. It doesn't change a lot at my age. It will change quite a bit at your age in terms of development needs if you address them. But it's not a good assumption that you just have those front of mind all the time. So writing down, these are the 3 things I really want to work on. Not technical again, but the soft skills that you mentioned, and finding somebody that models 1 or more of those and ask for their help.
There are counseling offices on campus that could point you in some directions. This is off the wall. How many people here have read the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin? You've all heard of Benjamin Franklin. Good. It's a really interesting book, and the reason I brought it up is some of the things Marty just said, is that Franklin had his own self-improvement plan. And not a big chunk, but a piece of the autobiography is about that. Have you heard of the Franklin Covey Company? Any of you? Well, they put out a bunch of materials for helping you develop yourself, and not just technically, but in terms of soft skills that you're talking about. I think some of their stuff is really good. You may have heard of the book, which really was big in the business community 20 years ago, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's mainly about soft skills. So you don't necessarily have to get a mentor, a biological mentor. You can get a book. You can get tapes if you're, don't know anyone. That stuff is out there. It really is.